Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Outside Insider podcast here on Philly Sports Network with myself, Liam Jenkins. We're bringing you all things Eagles related from the last 7 days as always, but today we've got a very special guest. Many of you are going to know who he is from his just sheer sassy Twitter presence, I think, at this point. But he's been a partner with us at Philly Sports Network for a while. He's been featured on Bleacher Report and Fox Sports Radio. Tyler Steege, my man, how you doing?
I'm good, sir. I'm glad to be joined, and I'm excited. You know what? This is like my first podcast ever, I think.
Ever?
So this is exciting. Yes, I think so. This is exciting.
He's taking podcast agilities now. It's a new era for the outside.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And talking of new eras as well, the Eagles starting a very new era as Super Bowl champions. They got kick-started with their preseason campaign on Thursday with a slightly disappointing loss to Pittsburgh. But obviously with preseason it's not about the score, and there's plenty to talk about from, a building forward perspective. And I guess, what stood out to you straight away looking back at that game?
Couple things. First off, the quarterback, Nate Sudfeld, a lot of talk around him. I think he looked really good for the situation. I don't know if if Eagle fans are kind of expecting a third string quarterback to go in and step in and be able to win a Super Bowl, but as far as just going through progressions, pocket presence, the arm is there. I just think he checked off a bunch of boxes. I don't expect him to go out there and be flawless. His first interception was ugly, but I think he bounced back really well. So Nate Sudfeld stood out to me. Dallas Goedert stood out to me. And then one more is Rasul Douglas. His overall game was just so inconsistent. And we'll get into that a little later, but just those three, Dallas Goedert is as advertised. I think he looked amazing. He did have that drop, but you can just tell by the way he catches the football. Just his route running, everything is advanced for a rookie. And in this scheme, it's something to get excited about because, Doug Peterson just has another weapon to work with, which is kind of scary.
Absolutely. If we first touch on Sudfeld then, because obviously this could be a really big piece moving forward, because if we look ahead past next season, we don't know what the future of Nick Foles is going to be. He may well stay in Philadelphia, he could look elsewhere to be a starter, and if that's the case, Sudfeld's going to be the guy that's going to have to step up and be that backup, because by year 4 of Carson Wentz's contract, the idea is that needing a clipboard quarterback, I'm assuming, would be out of the window, as helpful as it would be. So you want someone there to step in, and I think preseason, while it did show a lot of promise, and there was improvement over that Week 17 game, it was quite a stark reminder that, the Eagles probably did the best thing for hanging on to Foles for one more year. Because if Sudfeld had to start Week 1 because of Wentz's ACL and the Eagles had pulled a trigger on a trade back towards the draft, would that performance have inspired confidence?
Right, and that's a good point too, is a lot of people critiqued Howie Roseman because there was that rumor that the Browns offered a first-round pick or I think it was a late second for Nick Foles, and everybody said they should have pulled the trigger, but it's like, that's the scary thing, is if you win a Super Bowl with a guy like that, and as big as Carson Wentz is he does have elephant in the room, but he does kind of have injury concerns, so it is kind of scary, even back to college. So getting rid of Nick Foles for a second-round pick, immediate reaction, you want that because, the draft is here and you want an extra pick in the draft and an exciting player. But, I think, like you mentioned, you can't just get rid of something like that and go into the season with a blind eye and just hope that Nate Sudfeld is the number 2 quarterback. So I think looking back, too, I think you hit it right on the head. I think it was a good decision to not do that. But, moving forward, I would like to see a lot more from Nate Sudfeld. I don't think that he's a bona fide number 2 quarterback, but I think he has a potential for it. And I think that's what the Eagles are wanting him to do, is kind of grow into that role. And that way, after the 2018 season, they can kind of have Nate Sudfeld as Carson Wentz backup and hopefully get some type of compensation for Nick Foles if it all works out.
Yeah, that's it. And I think it's all about just being patient. And that's the one theme of this offseason. Even with Carson Wentz's injury, We look back at OTAs and everyone got extremely excited seeing Wentz, run around like a gazelle all of a sudden. And then we get to training camp and he took looked like a minor hit off Josh Sweat, and then people were like, well, okay, let's tone it back a bit. And then since then he hasn't been on 11 on 11s, and people are getting a bit worried, and it's like, do you know what, whether he comes back week 1 or week 6, the last thing you'd want to see is a situation that happened to Sam Bradford. You don't want to see a second ACL tear because it can inflict such a damage to a career. And we alluded to last week, there's a lot more that goes into rehabbing a muscle recovery than just can he stand on a leg and throw the football. It's to a degree going to learn how to walk again and come off those crutches and balance your weight on both legs so one's not all of a sudden 3 times as strong. And it's a difficult process. I think the Eagles have got to be calm and patient with that. And we'll kind of, I guess, segue onto the Carson Wentz debate now, but what you've seen from Wentz this season, the expectations that lie ahead, I guess the whole of the Eagles fan base is in a state of confusion of whether they want to see him dropped in at week 1 or whether they wouldn't mind if he was out a whole season. It's all very much been kept under wraps, but what are your impressions of that whole Carson Wentz rehab scenario right now?
I haven't seen him firsthand. I'm not at camp, so I can't speak for that. But all the reports indicate that he looks really good. He looks healthy. I've seen some clips of him. QB coaches are kind of like throwing him, having him do like quick agility drills. His knee looks good. But I've always said that I think that he's going to be ready for week 1. I still stand by that. And I don't see a purpose in holding him out week 1 and giving him 2 extra weeks to prepare, or for his what's the difference from a knee, him missing week 1 and being there week 3? Is the knee going to be that much stronger? So at that point, I think it just comes down to the doctor's decision. And once they clear him, I think the Eagles. And also the circus too. I mean, if Nick Foles starts week 1, and I know I've seen people talk about this, and I agree. If Nick Foles starts week 1 and throws for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns, then everybody knows Carson Wentz is the quarterback of this team. But I do think that there would be chatter, and it would cause a little internal, it's just that's something that you don't want. And so if he's healthy, he's cleared, then I think he's a quarterback week 1. And I think you just let that happen. I wouldn't deal with the circus for extra 2 weeks of trying to strengthen a knee that's already pretty strong and cleared by doctors. So
it's such an interesting dynamic, and it's the first time, honestly, that I've thought about that, because one of the big things that Peterson's preached is that whole quarterback room doesn't have an ego. That Wentz was happy for Foles during the Super Bowl win, and Foles was happy for Wentz during his, skyrocketing second season. But what would happen if you get to week 4, Wentz still isn't back, Foles still hasn't thrown a pick, for instance, he's at 12 touchdowns. As a head coach, do you then just go, well, okay, Carson, there's no egos here, we know this is your team, we're going to keep it with Nick to keep the ball rolling? And then from Carson's perspective, what's that? Because again, having already missed the end of that season, having not been able to play in the Super Bowl, and if the Eagles at that point are 4-0 and it's Foles' team, does that create, a very different dynamic than what's been portrayed? That's a very interesting point.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I don't think it would ever get to that point. I think Nick Foles can throw for 20 touchdowns in 2 games. And we just know what Nick Foles is. We saw his ceiling for sure in the Super Bowl and against Minnesota in the NFC Championship game. But that's only 2 games, and I think people forget about that. Those are only 2 games. Were they the biggest games of his career? Absolutely. But we have to remember, Nick, how many games did Carson Wentz look like the best quarterback in the NFL last year? Yeah. There was various games. So we live in a microwave era where everybody's kind of just reactionary to the most recent game or recent play. And Nick Foles had the 2 best games of his career, so everybody is holding on to that. And that's just what people need to remember is before his playoff run, people were wondering if Nate Sudfeld should start week 1 of the playoffs. So
I remember doing on that. Yeah, that was.
So that's where I don't think it'll ever get to that point. But it's a good problem to have. It's a good problem to have a second string quarterback that can go in and win a Super Bowl for you, and it's a good problem to have a number 3 quarterback who can. I think Nate Sudfeld is better than a lot of number 2 quarterbacks in this league. I think the Eagles are very, very set at the most important position in the NFL.
Absolutely. And talking of another good problem to have, I guess we'll come back to Goddard in a moment, but the cornerback position is one that has been shrouded with a lot of competition and uncertainty. Is Darby going to remain on the team? Is he not? Is there going to be a shock trade? The one thing I've personally been, rallying for about 3 months now is that Rasul Douglas moves to safety. And after that first preseason game where we saw a lot of Avonte Maddox in the slot, we saw a lot of Devontae Ballsby, which I suppose cast some doubt, okay, so maybe whether Sidney Jones is that much further ahead, and we get that, consensus now that the pads are on, it's a game scenario. But the whole cornerback picture, there's a lot to talk about, and, I mean, how would you handle this right now? You go into week 1, who are the 3 corners that you're putting out on the field in the nickel formation?
So if you would have asked me this 3 months ago, I would have the same 3, but I didn't think it would be how it is now. So starting outside corner, I thought would be Sidney Jones. But Jalen Mills has continued to just, I can't even explain it. He's so limited athletically. So when I've seen, like, his rookie year, you just saw, he has a hard time recovering. He uses the sideline really well, probably the smartest corner on the Eagles. And then you have Ronald Darby as a number 2. And then Sidney Jones as a slot corner that's why I'm not a believer in trading one of these guys. I mean, cornerback, it's so hard to find depth in this league, and that's one of the most crucial positions because if one guy goes down, somebody has to slide inside, or an inside guy has to slide outside, and it affects the entire defense. And that's why Patrick Robinson was so huge for the Eagles last year. So if you can lose a guy like Patrick Robinson and slide a guy like Sidney Jones in there, who's arguably the most talented cornerback on the Eagles team, it's insane to have that kind of depth. And that's why it doesn't make sense to me. And like you said, Rasul Douglas, he probably is the best fit at safety. I just don't think that he has the hips or feet to play corner in the NFL. But if somebody like Sidney Jones or Jalen Mills gets hurt, you're asking Rasul Douglas, and he stepped in last year and played well, but if you're asking him to do that against really, really good corners, or ask him to do that in the postseason for 4 to 5 games, I wouldn't trust it. And so what are you going to get for Jalen Mills in a trade, or what are you going to get for Ronald Darby? Are you going to get a 3rd round pick? That's what you gave up for Ronald Darby. So does it make sense to lose such a valued position and depth at such a valued position? It just doesn't make sense to lose it for a third round pick.
It's an interesting scenario. Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a lot of potential change at that position as well. And Jalen Mills, you mentioned, is one name that every year has got better and better and better. And whether that's just due to his own development or whether that's the strength of coaching staff in Corey Undlin, you've got to appreciate it. Year 1 he came into the league, one of the most targeted corners in the NFL, was ripped apart on numerous occasions. And then the second year he becomes a starter, kind of just by what happened with the other corners like Laodis, McKelvin and Carroll, and holds his own. And then we end up in 2018, where to think 2 years ago, the Eagles cornerback corps was Laodis, McKelvin, Ron Brooks and Nolan Carroll. And now you've got Ronald Darby, Jalen Mills, Sidney. It's a much better scenario to be in. I think Sidney Jones is going to be an interesting one. The key thing here is going to be Ronald Darby's second season. If Ronald Darby can go into Philadelphia in his second year with the team, ball out, have a Pro Bowl year, I don't think he's going to be able to afford him to keep him around for a few more years. And if that's the case, that's fine. But you can then move Jones maybe back outside, or you have got someone like Rasul Douglas who potentially by then may be ready to take that jump. But if he doesn't, and that injury prevails, or there is something else that holds him back, then that, again, casts an entirely different window. The Eagles are so well-rounded at corner, and with versatility being such a name of the game, everyone's, stating that Jalen Mills can start inside, that Sidney Jones can start inside. There's a lot of creative things they can do. And they may just do well to kind of do personnel matchups. Instead of just having a set starting trio, move guys around and just see what works best throughout a game. And I don't see there's a real reason that couldn't pay off.
Right. And one last thing to touch on that is if Ronald, like you mentioned, if Ronald Darby does have a good year, which I expect him to, and he demands a pretty big contract in the offseason, you still get all of 2018 to evaluate Jalen Mills. You still get a 2018 season to evaluate Rasul Douglas, Devontae Bowsby. Like you are giving time rather than trading a guy and then just hoping somebody can be plugged in. Why not just take that, accept your depth, which is, again, there's so many teams that lack depth at the cornerback position. So this is something that the Eagles have leverage. It's a rare thing for them to have this. So it doesn't make sense to me to for a 3rd round pick or a 4th round pick. It's I don't know. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think that the best course of action is just probably going to be to wait and see what happens and be patient. You don't want to jump at anything straight away, and that's the one thing this front office has done very well, is just playing cards close to their chest. Like, we're not seeing blockbusters every week like we used to. I mean, my first 2 years I remember covering the Eagles, the amount of times I had to sprint home from work to write a story, or sprint on my lunch break, or pretend to go to the toilet to write an article. It was terrible. Honestly, I can't put it into words. And in the last 2 off seasons, you're there like, oh, I can just kind of write a story today and have time on it. So just have that now element of reassurance that the front office know what they're doing. There is a plan there, and moving forward with that is definitely going to be best. But another position which segues back onto offense like that is tight end, and it's one the Eagles have prioritised for years now. And it's easy to think a few years ago when Trey Burton came into the league as an undrafted free agent, he caught on behind Selleck, behind Ertz, behind James Casey. There were 4 tight ends on that roster. And now we go into this season where Burton's obviously kind of grown. It's like, watching a kid, isn't it? Like, he's just grown up, he's left the nest, he's got a new job. Like, he's moved out. And then you've got, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, who I'm sure we're going to talk lots about in this segment, then Richard Rodgers and Billy Brown. And I mean, is there a case for that 4th tight end on the roster, or is the Goddard and Ertz matchup just going to create so much chaos that you can get by with Richard Rodgers filling that Selleck role?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Because Doug, first of all, tight end is probably the most scheme-dependent position in the end, at least on offense, in my opinion. It's what depends on a good quarterback, and it depends on a good coach. And that's why I'm so excited about the Dallas Goedert draft pick, is because you get Zach Ertz, who's either the 3rd, 4th, 5th best tight end in the league, and then you're adding arguably the best tight end in the draft to a coach who knows how to scheme up tight ends and these formations that are just get you matchups that you want in the red zone, anywhere. And so this already, I would put, as far as tight end duos, it seems like a hot take, but it's already a top 5 tight end duo in the league, which is crazy because we haven't even seen Dallas Goedert catch an actual meaningful pass. And as far as depth at the position, it's tough because I know there's questions whether they're going to keep 5 or 6 receivers. Then I wonder if they're going to keep 4 or 5 halfbacks. So it really depends. It might come down to a guy like Josh Adams and then Billy Brown, or a guy like Bryce Treggs or Shelton Gibson and Billy Brown. It's just going to be tough, and it depends on. I'm sure position coaches are going to be fighting for their guys.
Yeah.
I think the tight end coach is going to be fighting for Billy Brown, and I think it's just going to. I don't know. That's going to be a tough. Excuse me. It's going to be tough to be able to predict that. I'm not sure how that's going to pan out.
I think one of the big factors into these decisions is going to be special teams as well. And I think for myself, that's been one of the big points I've been hammering this offseason, because the Eagles lost such an amount of depth.
Yeah, that's a good point.
This offseason. They're lucky to get Corey Graham back, who did play a big role. But some of the biggest names in terms of just special teams tackles, not in terms of blocking or the linemen or anything like that, but in just making those tackles, they lost so many players. So you're going to see Dave Phipp have a tremendous impact now on the guys that stay up. So if you've got someone like Shelton Gibson can prove himself on special teams, and he almost muffed that, kick return out of the end zone where Matt Collins kind of saved the day. But that could be the difference. Just that extra effort on special teams could well be the difference between Dave Phipp handing in your name on a sheet of paper or handing in the man opposite you. And I think in terms of preseason now moving forward, it's got to be an area of focus when you're watching the game. It's very easy to look at the quarterbacks and, the skill players, but at the end of the day, special teams is just as important, and I really do think that there's a massive opportunity for names like Corey Nelson, for instance, who has been completely left out of this window. When he signed, he was going to be, the saviour of the Michael Kendrick spot, the new starting outside linebacker, that's been divided between Camu Grugier-Hill, who led the Eagles in special teams tackles last year, and obviously Nate Jerry as well. So now you've got an opportunity for someone like Corey Nelson, who played 68% of special team snaps on Thursday, to make his impact that way. And I think that's going to be such a big area of the team for someone like Gibson, for someone like Richard Rodgers, for someone who's a little bit further down, to just get that extra kind of leg up over the man opposite.
Yep, that's a good point. Special teams. That actually is probably what will decide the position battle and who will be the 51st, 52nd, and 53rd guy on the active roster. That's a very good point.
Definitely so. So looking at the wide receivers then at the moment, obviously Shelton Gibson, I mean, what was the emotion like seeing Shelton Gibson catch his first ever NFL touchdown pass? Almost like that roar of emotion that he let out. You could almost see that massive weight just being lifted from his shoulders.
Yeah, and what a ball by Sudfeld. That was cool for Gibson, especially after, I mean, I always try to put myself in these guys' shoes, and like last year, Gibson was under a microscope. It seemed like every drop was magnified and was tweeted by reporters at camp. And so it's nice to see guys like that just bounce back, similar to Nelson Aguilar. Like, it's just cool to see guys have a slow start or a bad start, and then they're able to put something together like that. And it's cool to see in the first preseason game. Gibson, was that his only catch? I don't know. I think it might have been. But that's cool for him just to bounce back like that, and hopefully he can put together a couple of good games. And it sounds like he might, which is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the other guys at that wide receiver position then, I mean, in terms of kick returners, I think that's been one of the big focus, almost again directly relating to special teams. But someone like Bryce Treggs, who still had a few catches, I think he had 3 for 39 yards. I mean, Treggs is an interesting one because this is a name that has been around this roster now for quite some time, apart from a brief stint in Cleveland, but he's never really found his footing. Apart from that one catch he made that one time that was a 40 yard. We'll leave that for now. I mean, apart from that, there's not a big sample size of Bryce Treggs catches. Where does he sit in this wide receiver picture? Is he an outsider? Because practice squad eligibility is going to run out at some point for him. I mean, is he just going to be a cap casualty? I mean, what is the ceiling now for Bryce Treggs?
Well, I mean, if you just go by the numbers, you have Alshon, you have Mike Wallace, you have Nelson. Who would you put as the fourth receiver? Would it be Shelton? No, actually, sorry, you have Mac Hollins, so that's 4. And then it seems like Shelton Gibson would be 5. Like, are you going to carry 6 receivers? And I just don't see that happening. I think, I mean, because if you're looking for a speed guy, I'm just taking a younger guy that we haven't even seen the ceiling of, and that would be Shelton Gibson compared to Bryce Treggs, who we've kind of seen already, smaller guy, fast guy. But I mean, I'm taking, I personally, I would take the gamble on the guy that's unknown rather than a guy that's kind of already showcased what he has and his abilities, which I don't think Bryce Treggs is a very good receiver in this league.
Yeah, and I think it's hard because obviously Treggs was there on Wentz's rookie season, and the way to kind of contextualize that is if you remember the wide receiver depth in 2016, where it was Dorial Green-Beckham, it was Bryce Treggs, there was a struggling Nelson Aguilar. It's not like there was an opportunity to own that season, you know, when Jordan Matthews was struggling, when even Paul Turner was making an impact at some point, and Bryce Treggs couldn't, apart from that one catch against the Giants.
Just really, really quick, how far have we come since that? I mean, that was just 2 years ago, man.
Talk about a glow up. I mean, this.
Yeah, I mean, you have a guy like Alshon holding down the number 1 position, and then you have Nelson Aguilar and Mike Wallace to stretch the field. It's this offense is insane. It's really not fair.
The one area of weakness that I still worry about a tiny bit is just the interior guard position. The main reason for that, obviously, is that if you think back to a year ago, it was between Sayamalo and Chance Warmack to win out the left guard spot. And for fans, it was like, okay, well, whoever wins, you've either got a former first-round pick working with Jeff Stoutland, who was his former coach, or you've got a third-round pick who everyone loves, and it's Isaac Sayamalo. 2 weeks into the regular season, no one had won it out, and Wisniewski got his spot and then went on to have a fantastic season and earn a contract extension. Brilliant, fair play to Wiz. The point is now, after that, depth-wise, if Wiz goes down or if Brooks goes down, Sayamalo has now been shoved into centre, where he's still sailing balls over. I mean, how many? I think it's quite instinctive, where if you snap a ball and it goes way too high, that you don't do it again, or you kind of don't put as much force on it. But I'm just guessing as someone that hasn't played the sport. But to see this weeks and games and camps and it's been since May that Sayamalo cannot snap a football under 12 foot. Like, what's going on there? I mean, there's got to be a serious concern.
I have never played offensive line either, so I couldn't tell you. My only guess would be he's used to playing guard and his head is down. So when he's snapping, he's so focused on what he has, his assignment. And so he's just getting the ball out as quick as possible. And he's trying to get his hands on a defender. That would be my only explanation. But yeah, I agree. Guard depth is probably, it's you're set at tackle because, I mean, you've got Lane, you've got Jason Peters, and then you have Vaitai, which is people, again, critique him, and it's like, this is was he a 7th round pick, 6th round pick?
5th, I believe.
5th round pick, and he came from TCU. I mean, he stepped in, and the fact that you barely heard his name in the Vikings game, you barely heard his name in the Super Bowl, and that is a good thing for a young tackle going against in those games. I mean, that's just so you have tackle depth, but guard depth is probably the most worrisome position as far as on offense. I agree. If Brandon Brooks goes down or Wisniewski goes down, you're relying on Samalo to step in, and he looked awful against the Chiefs last year, and that was a game I believe that got him benched.
Yeah.
And so I have zero confidence in Samalo. But
it's strange.
I mean, who knows?
Because Sayamalo's seen as this saviour of the offensive line because he's versatile and everyone loves him and he's quick and worked out with Wentz at the Pro Day. And yet Vaitai, who has been put into situations that no 5th round pick usually is, where you're filling in for a potential Hall of Fame right tackle at one point, in your rookie season during a suspension. Then the next season it is a definite Hall of Famer Jason Peters you're filling in for. So he's played both bookends of the offensive line as a 5th round pick in his first 2 years in the league. And yet he's vilified for it. And as you said, he has had some really big games when the Eagles need him to most. The Vikings and the Super Bowl, 2 very big ones. But as time went on, he was nowhere near as bad. Yes, there were teething problems against Ryan Kerrigan, but I'm sure everyone has teething problems against Ryan Kerrigan because it's Ryan
right.
Kerrigan. There's only so much criticism you can give a guy like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, we hold these guys to high standards, but the defenders get paid too. And so, I mean, Ryan Kerrigan is one of the best pass rushers in the league. Who's the Vikings yet? Is it Everson Griffin? Which Vaitai played really well against. And then he played well against James Harrison, who's not nearly as good of a pass rusher as he used to be. But I mean, when you could put together these performances and then you have Jason Peters in your ear all off season and during training camp, the guy's only going to get better. So Vaitai is a guy that I would trust going forward in a year or two. If you give him like a mid-level contract and you kind of just are like, hey, you can take over this starting position whenever Jason Peters is ready to retire, because he's given the luxury at this point. He's earned the respect to where he can choose whenever he wants out.
He'll be 55 and still competing at training camp.
Right, yeah.
It's definitely strange. And I think that with Vaitai as well, one of the big things that stood out to me was that what he's like off the field. And I didn't get a perspective on this until this off-season, where I spoke to his high school coach. And he said that every year since leaving, so not before TCU, so ever since he left high school, he goes back to the high school every single year and talks to the kids and gives them little clinics and says, look, if I've made it, so can you, and inspires them. And even after winning the Super Bowl, he did the same thing. And then when Matt Pryor gets drafted, who was obviously a former teammate at TCU, he was on the phone about, I think he said 5 days before, talking about the Eagles and how great it would be if he gets drafted. 2 minutes after the phone goes, so the minute the Eagles hang up, Vaitai's on the phone congratulating him. That's the sort of guy you want in a locker room. It goes far beyond, can he just maul down a defensive lineman? To have that kind of leadership and to want to will someone else to get better, that's a good thing to have.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's cool. I didn't hear that story. I've never heard that story. That's very cool.
I should be reading my articles.
Oh, no.
Only messing. So we're going to shift, I think, onto the defensive side of the football then as well. So spoken about the O-line, how good did that defensive line look? Like the first team defensive line in that opening series. Like, more specifically Fletcher Cox, who was the entire defensive line. But that was just a crazy first couple of plays.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the first thing that you notice is the trenches. The first team Eagles offensive line killed the Steelers' first team defense, and then vice versa. Eagles defensive line just dominated the Steelers' first team offensive line. I mean, the fact that Fletcher Cox he goes in, dominates David DeCastro, and a first team All Pro guard, gets a sack, and then on the very next play, they run a screen, and you see Fletcher Cox sprinting and trailing the defender and takes him down. It's like, that's just not fair. And why is the guy trying? Why is this guy trying so hard in the first ever meeting of this game? And that just speaks so much volumes of his mindset. And when you hear stuff like him say, "Hey, I want to win Defensive Player of the Year," chances are he probably won't get it because of the way that the Eagles rotate their defensive line. I just don't think the usage is there, and I don't think his numbers will be able to get there. But the fact that he's striving for something like that is something you want to hear. It means that they're pushing for something. They're not lax. They're not lackadaisical after a Super Bowl win. You want to hear defenders say stuff like that because it means they're pushing each other. And then one more little side note is on the first third down of the preseason, Michael Bennett slid inside to D-tackle right next to Fletcher Cox. And that, I think, is going to be a matchup nightmare for offenses when you have Brandon Graham healthy, you have Michael Bennett inside, you have Fletcher Cox inside, and then you have Derek Barnett inside or Chris Long, outside. You're not going to find a better defensive or four-man front on a third down than that, and that's just ridiculous.
It is a human cheat code at this point. I think the one thing that I was a little bit skeptical of, and again, another slight hole, was that the impact of that Timmy Jernigan injury I don't think's been really amplified enough, because I know that obviously you've got Haloti there. He's, a definite, I would say, one of the best defensive tackles of this sort of generation, like the last 5-6 years maybe, even probably beyond that, given the amount of Pro Bowls that he's got. But the problem is Nata's got a lot of injury concerns. He's coming off quite a bad season in ending injury. The durability's not going to be there. And as you said, the Eagles rotate their DTs a lot. We saw last year, Vial and Bell Allen accounted for nearly 60% of defensive snaps. So if you're now having to rotate Nata around as well, is Michael Bennett going to become a kind of hybrid who is going to take some of the weight off that? Because without Jernigan to take off those double teams, you've got to find another way to get Fletcher Cox open so he can feast. And I think if it's not going to be someone like Elijah Qualls or it's not going to be Destiny Vial, you are looking to Michael Bennett to slide inside. You're looking to those NASCAR packages and maybe even slide Cox into one of those. Or play him at cornerback at this point because you can do everything else. But I mean, there's got to be even a slight concern that the run defense could suffer a little bit in Jernigan's absence.
Absolutely, and kind of correlates to it too is losing Kendricks. I think a lot of I don't think the Eagles have any major holes, but I do think that because they won the Super Bowl, you know how Eagle fans work as a whole. You can't really critique the team without getting backlash. And yes, the Timmy Jernigan injury is definitely being underplayed. He's not going to put up sack numbers, but what he does in the run game is huge. If you could take on two defenders and free up a linebacker to where he can just come in clean, that is what these linebackers do. They clean up. The D tackles do, or the D line does all the nasty work, and they're just supposed to suck up blocks, and then these linebackers are supposed to just run free. And so as long as Jordan Hicks and Nigel Bradham are healthy, then I don't think the run defense will be affected that much. But if one of them goes down and Timmy Jernigan's injury kind of lingers, then I do think that you might see some running backs put up some big numbers against this team. But another thing that kind of correlates with it too is a lot of teams don't run against the Eagles because they're playing from behind a lot, which also helps. I mean, seriously, so a lot of teams just feel the pressure. I mean, the offense just takes up so much time, and so it puts so much pressure on an offensive coach when you finally get the ball after a 13-minute drive from your opposition, and you're like, you know what, I want to go throw the rock. Like I'm not doing a methodical 3 and out anymore. So the offense, this team, I know I sound like a homer, but this team is so deep, and that's why I see people kind of expecting a regression, and I'm just like, I don't know. I would be stunned if this team doesn't win 11 to 12 games. I mean, they're so deep in the most important positions. Whenever you see a team regress, it's normally when they're affected by the trenches. Yeah. But this team is their strength is the offensive coach. Sorry, and I'm way off topic, but I'm rambling. The offensive line is a strength and the defensive line is a strength. And then when you add in all the pieces around it, plus an MVP quarterback, and then a coach that is one of the best play callers in the league, it's just hard to see or envision a regression from this team. I just don't see it at all.
I think that's always been the whole ethos. I remember, it was the start of last offseason, I think, and I was speaking to a source, and he said that the whole plan for the Eagles from this point on, which must have been around February, was that they're going to build from the ball out. And I was like, okay, I can kind of see that. Like, you're going to just start at the offensive and defensive line, then work at the skill positions. And you look at the way that worked with the first big, free agent signings, and then you trade for Jernigan. Then you have Brandon Brooks with a big extension. And all of a sudden, Kelsey, Brooks, and that's half of your offensive line with Lane Johnson playing for 4 years. Like, that's huge. Defensive line, you're going to have Fletcher Cox. Brandon Graham, obviously, his contract extension's up in the air, but you've got Derek Barnett, who's a long-term option. Someone like Josh Sweat, who can develop into that long-term option. You're absolutely right. The trenches is always been a huge focus for this team, but now that it's become like the epicenter of it, and they're building naturally outwards, when you get to the outside and these backloaded contracts, it gives the incentive to someone like Jeffrey to play. Because you know he's going to get the ball. That the ball's going to be able to leave the quarterback's hands without it hitting the ground first, which is a huge thing. And it's just scary to think, like, how quickly this team's built. I think the other area that people don't factor into account when they, look at Super Bowl hangovers or teams regressing is coaching turnover. Because the minute you win a Super Bowl or you succeed, everyone comes for you. And the Eagles saw it a bit. They lost Frank Reich. They lost, John DeFilippo. But let's be honest, that offense in preseason, like that cheeky run by Corey Clement, I don't think that's going to go backwards. Because Mike Groh has been in that offense. He's been regarded as one of the top positional coaches in the league. Now gets promoted internally. That's a huge get, because Groh could very, very easily have been poached away under some slimy little rules somewhere or some little loophole. But he's with the team, he's coordinating the offense, and you heard Doug talk about it in, the preseason press conferences, that he's a lot more vocal, that he's in his ear suggesting things and coming up to him with plays. And I'm not sure whether that was a shot that Frank Reich didn't, but yeah, it's interesting to see that Mike Groh is that heavily involved, where his fingerprint is that prominent, that you're already starting to see it in preseason.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that. When I read that headline, I was fully expecting Philly media to take that and run with it and say that Frank Reich wasn't vocal. But yeah, I mean, the assistant coaches, you mentioned earlier, Corey Unlin, as a DB coach, I thought Jim Schwartz might get a job as a head coach this year. I think the way this defense is set up, we might lose him next year. And I think Corey Unlin would be a top candidate for defensive coordinator. The way he works, I mean, Jalen Mills is you've seen it firsthand. You saw it with Patrick Robinson. Last year people weren't even expecting him to be on the team after training camp.
So much. Sorry, I got honestly that one that I remember, because when
I remember your film piece. You had a film piece on him, and I remember watching. Yeah.
And I was like, look, he's not as bad as you think. He was amazing in the nickel at Indianapolis, and then next thing you know, Darby gets signed. Robinson gets shifted into the nickel, and all of a sudden he's this miraculous corner, and everyone's like, wow, what a turnaround. No one saw it coming. Like, where did this come from? And I was like, just watch tape, man. Come on, just open up a laptop.
Yeah. No, Corey Unlin is very, very good at his job. I mean, and that's the tough thing is we're not inside the building, so we can't see how he breaks down film. So we're not sure about how intelligent he is. But I mean, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess the hype around him when the Eagles got him was that he was his work in Denver with Chris Harris and with Talib. And I mean, you're seeing it here. So his work is definitely shown. And then on the offensive side, Mike Groh, that's exciting too. I do think losing Frank Reich is a little bit of and John DeFilippo. I mean, I think John DeFilippo is going to be a crazy good head coach eventually one day. And I think him going to Minnesota is why I think Kirk Cousins will pan out. I do have my doubts about Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, but John DeFilippo is such a good coach. Like, you just hear it when he breaks down tape, when he breaks down film, you just know immediately that how successful that guy is going to be. So I'm a big voucher for that. But I do think the Eagles are in good hands. They have their play caller back, which is Doug Peterson, and he's not going anywhere. And then when you have Jim Schwartz holding down the defense with Corey Unlin, and you have Mike Groh on offense, I think they're set. It's not something that I would stress about.
No, and another big impact for the Eagles as well has been Doug Peterson's play calling. If you can remember a short while ago in 2016, how Peterson was crucified on a near weekly basis for play calling.
Yeah.
And whether it was, instead of going for field goals or instead of punting, just going for things. And then 1 year later, he's this established play calling god where we're all bowing to his feet. And it's just crazy how much can change if you just let someone grow. And if instead of just jumping to conclusions or really trying to rip everything out really quickly and rip the rug away, just let everything settle in, bearing in mind the circumstance in which he came into that team and the personnel that he had. Now he enters a year where his playbook's gotten bigger and badder. He's got much more intimidating personnel again. I can't see it. I mean, the worry about play calling for me never existed. It was just not having the right personnel to execute what he was trying to do. It was like trying to set a world record lap time in Formula 1 and having a motorbike. Like, you're just not going to do it. You can only go so far. So
right.
By having now someone like Dallas Goedert or someone that can really just expand this offense out and have, in the red zone, you've got Alshon Jeffrey, who's 6'3", Matt Collins 6'4", Goddard and Ertz are 6'5" each. You've got Sproles, potentially Pumphrey, Ajayi and Clement can both catch the ball. Like, what are you doing sat at the goal line? Like, where do you even focus your attention? And that's what makes this offense so powerful.
And let's not forget the greatest receiver of all time, Nelson Aguilar. We didn't mention him. Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, and I'll eat some crow. After the 2016 season, we all saw the potential of Carson Wentz. So I was so frustrated. Yes, they had a bad receiving core. Yes, Carson Wentz was a rookie, but it frustrated me with how late in the season, even after the playoffs weren't an option, it frustrated me how conservative Doug Peterson was. And looking back, maybe it was a smart thing to do. You're just like, hey, let's just get through this season. Let's get Carson Wentz comfortable. Let's let him see coverages, and let's get the ball out quick. That way we don't have to worry about injuries. We don't want him holding the ball too long, et cetera, et cetera. I understand it, but that was my biggest critique of Peterson, was it just seemed like he was protecting Carson Wentz too much. But the way it panned out, and fast forwarding to 2017, I am not allowed to critique him because everything worked out. Carson Wentz came back. The offense expanded. But that was my biggest thing, is I think the receivers struggled a little bit more than they had an awful 2016 season. But I think that Peterson kind of played into it with just how it was just such a simple game plan week in and week out. It was like, get the a 3-step drop, get the ball out quick, first read. There wasn't really progressions. He ran dagger concepts. I don't even know how many times per game. So it's crazy to see, like you mentioned, just in 1 year, and we expect a quarterback to be able to take a huge year 2 leap, and it's even cooler to see a coach. Nobody said, hey, we're going to change the play caller, we're going to do this. Doug Peterson just improved vastly and turned into I don't even know, top 5 play caller in the league. And I know people look for consistency, but I mean, what he showed when you can do what he did with a backup quarterback and implement a game plan like that and have Nick Foles look like, I don't even know who, Joe Montana. I mean, he looked insane. That was just it shows just so much of what that guy can do. And like you mentioned, you're adding a guy like Mike Wallace, who is a significant upgrade over Torrey Smith. And you're adding a guy like Dallas Goedert, who is a significant receiving improvement than Brent Selleck. And I know you lose Trey Burton, but I don't think you're losing that much from Trey Burton to Dallas Goedert. You may even be getting an improvement. I'm not going to put my money where my mouth is there yet, but I'm just saying there's potential there for Dallas Goedert this this system that he's in, he could not have joined a better system.
Yeah. And I think the thing with Trey Burton is a lot of people tend to focus on how amazing he was. What people don't take into account is why. And he very much was an unknown. I mean, at the time when he first came in 2016, the reason that chemistry was there with Wentz was because Wentz for a time was QB3, right? And working on 7-on-7s in the drills in camp, you've got Ertz with the 1s, Selleck with the 2s. So Wentz, the rookie quarterback, was left with Trey Burton. So they built up a rapport, they built up that chemistry. They get into a regular season, all of a sudden Wentz is the starter. The man he's most familiar with is the one closest to that offensive line. And then you expand that after a year of playing. He now goes to Chicago, where, don't get me wrong, he's going to be a great player. He's got all the athleticism in the world. He's got the potential there. But that, what I always call the Chris Hogan effect, where you just don't account for him at all until it's done, I think you lose that. It's the same with Dak Prescott. When Dak Prescott comes in, rookie year, blows the league away, everyone's like, wow, that's brilliant. Year 2, you've got tape. And now you've got a full season of Trey Burton being a prominent receiver. You're going to find ways to cover it and ways to account for that. So I do think that the decision to let Burton walk and sign Goddard was a much better plan for the Eagles. As you say, they're improving in areas where they're not compensating in losing Burton. So yeah, 100% agree with that.
Yes, sir. I agree. I agree with everything.
It's been a very positive podcast, and I think it feels scary to now not have negative, rants about the Eagles anymore. It's a very, very different world we live in. But
the world is going to end this year.
We're on 45 minutes now, which is scarily quick. We could be here all day. But we've got another preseason coming up against, an opponent we know quite well, the New England Patriots. What game did they lose recently? Was it Super Bowl 50? That's it, right?
Yes.
That's the one.
That's it, yes.
Had to make sure I got that one right. The Eagles go back to Foxborough. It's going to be a very different dynamic, so anyone trying to, I guess, rally for a dominant win, maybe not the best time to bet your money. But what are you looking for in this preseason game?
Preseason 2, I don't know how, I don't watch the Patriots closely, obviously as much as the Eagles, but normally teams let their quarterback play 3 to 4 series in the second preseason game, sometimes even a quarter. It's just I want to see the defense against Tom Brady. The D-line, I want to see the D-line against their offensive line, which has always been a strength. And then I want to see the secondary, which got torched for like 500 yards in the playoffs, or in the Super Bowl, sorry. So I want to see Darby. I want to see the starting corners. Who else? And then offensively, I mean, obviously I want to see Nate Sudfeld again. I want to see the protection, and I want to see Dallas Goedert. That guy's, I mentioned him so many times today, but I mean, it's such an exciting piece. And I tweeted this the other day, like, there hasn't been a rookie Eagles player with this low of expectations. I mean, this team just won its first ever Super Bowl, and there's a guy named Zach Ertz as the starter at the position. So, I mean, Dallas Goedert can go for 5 catches in his rookie season. I feel like it'll just be overlooked. I mean, as long as the Eagles are winning. But, I mean, he's in an offensive scheme that isn't going to force the ball to anybody. So nobody's expecting his stats to be through the roof. So he's in just which helps him, right? I mean, think about you heard it with Nelson Aguilar when he struggled in his rookie season. And Marcus Smith, too, if I'm allowed to say that name on here.
Well, I mean, be careful.
But, I mean, when those guys start to struggle, I mean, you hear it whenever you're on Twitter or whenever you're on a social network or Philly media. If you start to struggle, they will bash you, and it can get to you. So I think the lower expectations and after a Super Bowl win is going to benefit Dallas Goedert because there isn't that pressure to step in and be this bona fide number 1 tight end or to be this number 1 target. It's
the players that they've drafted, as you say, because they're not needing to be starters straight away. Aguilar was expected to in a position that I know wide receiver it was all the same bracket, but the intricacies of the game needed in the slot and outside are very different, And I think Aguilar was always suited to the slot out of USC. And this year, the players they've got, Josh Sweat, 4th rounder, isn't probably going to start for a while unless there's injuries. It's the same with Dallas Goedert. It's the same with pretty much every free agency addition, with maybe the exception of Michael Bennett. And I think and with Bennett, he's been a starter for God knows how long now. So, as you say, you're not having that immediate pressure. if we drafted a running back in the first round, for instance, which
Yep.
many people were pushing to, you've got a very different dynamic, and it's then expecting to be that bell cow back. Are they going to struggle? Although behind this offensive line, I'm pretty sure I could run for a little bit, so maybe not. But the point's the same. And just having that weight of responsibility off, where you can marinate behind the veterans, it's so valuable for the younger guys. And you see it in rosters throughout the league. KJ Wright with the Seahawks, for me, is one of the biggest examples of that. You look at how he's grown since he's been in the league, and it's just by sitting in behind some of the biggest, baddest players in the game. And that's exactly what the Eagles have right now.
Right. Absolutely. Situation. There's no sport that is like players are affected more by a situation. Coaching staffs, your position groups, your position coach. There's just so much that goes into it, and like I was saying earlier, like a position like tight end, it's so affected by your coaching scheme and your quarterback. Can your quarterback even get you the ball? Goddard's situation is literally picture perfect. And then another guy that I want to watch too on the defensive side is Avonte Maddox. I think he struggled a lot against Pittsburgh. James Washington had like a 40 or 50 yard catch over his head. I thought that he would be able to compete for the slot job when he was drafted, but he started a little slow. So I want to see, and he was getting outside reps against Pittsburgh, which is surprising. I want them to kind of just stick him in the slot and let him learn that position. Because I think he could be really good there, but the development of Sidney Jones and him taking over the slot role, I think and then Devontae Bowsby, who's kind of young too. I don't know how old he is. I want to say like 25, 26. You have that. I understand why they're giving Maddox outside, but I just don't see him being ever an outside corner. So I don't know. I know it's good and it's beneficial for a cornerback to get reps out there, but like I said, I would just rather them. I mean, who am I? I'm just some guy, but I would rather them kind of shape him into being a potentially good slot corner, or maybe even potentially a safety. Who knows? So that'll be another guy that I'm watching a lot of, and hopefully Nelson Aguilar gets some reps. I want to see my guy.
I know. I swear, the day you meet Nelson Aguilar and have a little cuddle may be my most romantic moment of all time. Just putting it out there now.
Yeah, I'm happy.
He's at the little blush.
I'm happy for the guy, man. I like I said earlier with Shelton Gibson, it's just cool to see players be able to bounce back, especially from such a low of Nelson. After that Seattle game in 2016 was just ridiculous. I've never seen such a low movement. Even him in the locker room, and then like he just has this crazy season, and it's just cool. And then now, I'm expecting a huge season this year too. So. I'm excited.
You and me both. Here's an interesting thing as well. This has literally just happened. This never happens when we record podcasts. The Eagles have actually just signed Christian Hackenberg. So that's happened.
Great. What?
So I'm assuming, my reflection would be that if Nick Foles is still battling muscle spasms, you're going to have Joe Callahan and Nate Sudfeld splitting 50-50 a game. You need, ideally, a third quarterback. I would presume that's what it's for. I don't think Hackenberg's going to be QB1 at any point, but if it gives a more direct
I don't know.
Then...
I don't know. This might be QB drama.
Oh God, don't.
No, I don't even know what to expect. It's so late in camp. It's going to be so hard for him to get the playbook down. So that's going to be interesting to watch.
It's okay. We'll just run daggers.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. Or just throw fades to Goddard and Ertz.
Exactly. You can't go wrong. I'm sure, we could give it a go. Try the fades to Goddard and Ertz. We may even get a little bit far. Who knows? But we're going to end it there because we'll be here for another 4 hours otherwise, which I'm sure some of you would get bored. So thank you so much to Tyler for coming on. Before you go, how can people keep up with your Eagles-related content on Twitter?
My Twitter name is, and sorry, I didn't want to correct you but everybody, it is pronounced Steege. So,
oh no, oh God,
yeah. No. I've never, even in school, I just accepted the Steege or Steege, name, but it's, T Steege, NFL,
so I can't even
TST.
the need for Steege anymore.
No, you can. My friends still call me it too. That's actually what's kind of taken over. yeah, I try to stay level headed. I try to I mean, there's definitely highs on the team, but I'm not one to sugarcoat things. I'm going to be honest, and some people like it, some people don't, but that's about it.
Twitter, right? That's what it's all about.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If you want to follow myself or Philly Sports Network, it's at Liam Jenkins21 or at Philadelphia SN. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new, don't forget you can hit that subscribe button down below if you're on YouTube, or there is a link to follow it on iTunes as well, so you can get this podcast to your phone without even having to lift them up. It just does it for you. You just pick up your phone and it's there. Much easier. Click that and you'll be sorted. So thank you again to Tyler for tuning in, and we'll be back next week with another episode of The Outside Insider.